I opened the dusty pages of the book and crossed the Milky Way to a strange universe. There is a chanter, whose flesh and blood are blooming, and the valley is filled with secluded beauty. They shout in unison, the way cannot be named, it cannot be formed, it can be felt and responded to. It transforms 129,600 fruits, transforms them into heaven, and harmonizes all things. Those who are troubled by God have no face to grow scales, their ridges to touch, and they lie in the sea murmuring. Holy Lord without light. The end of the king. I offer to the mortal world, may the stars turn into foolishness, and glory return to the mother of all things. Listen to these words, come. I lifted my head and saw the heavenly sovereign standing high above the stars, with a grey and white bony flat sky crown growing behind his head. The 10,000 dragons made threads of flesh and blood, weaving the true cultivation into a Taoist robe and becoming one with him. I lowered my eyes and saw the deity emerge from the abyss. The worm was his body, with wings built up from his eyeballs. Under the holy light, flesh and blood crawled, and the skinless loved ones howled mournfully in his kingdom. I didn't know who to seek my way to for a moment. I just want a healthy longevity. Is there any non-toxic and harmless variety? This is a story of ordinary people traveling between multiple worlds, facing the indescribable, exploring the indescribable, and ultimately becoming indescribable. This article is a multi-world reverse passage that integrates multiple system settings. In the early stage, it was a realistic and 17th-century Western background, while in the middle stage, it was an ancient Eastern background. Reader Group 87893234 Keywords of the novel. List of Strange Tales without pop-ups. Download the complete collection of List of Strange Tales TXT, and read the latest chapters of List of Strange Tales. Chapter 1. He. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. He Gu Shouya opened the door and watched a group of grey birds fly under the eaves of the Taoist temple. The early spring sun is warm and pleasant, and on the snow-covered fields, one can vaguely see figures in groups of 3 or 2. Even further away is the uninhabited dense forest, with towering spruces and pine trees spreading upwards, enveloping the mountains and drawing a black and white layer dragon. In this remote corner that has not yet been baptized by the Industrial Revolution, tranquility is the most common theme all day long. Meow. A large white maned cat rushed out of the backyard, jumped onto the wall on a water tank, and skillfully fell into the snow, leaving a trail and running away. Gu Shouya glanced at the large jar next to him, which was swaying wildly. The bottomed thin ice appeared faint in the sunlight, just like his mood of not wanting to fetch water. At this moment, he would reminisce about the era before, when the cement jungle wrapped in steel and cables was like the Heavenly Father's church in the mouths of neighbors. With just a flick of their fingers, everyone could intuitively feel the miracles and convenience brought by human power. Gu Shouya thought for a moment and hung the wooden knife in his hand on the nearby wall, shouting towards the distance, "Tap water." Whoosh! The snowflakes scattered, and the big white cat emerged from somewhere. Its 4 legs flew fast, holding a frozen rabbit in its mouth, and it ran to Gu Shouya in a flash. It placed the wild rabbit at Gu Shouya's feet, meowed at him, scratched his snowy beard with its paws, and looked up as if looking forward to something. Don't play with Marn's dog in the future when the dog is angry. His dog follows him, and girls should learn to be reserved. Do you know how to be reserved? Gu Shouya shook his head, extended a finger, and leaned towards the forehead of the big white cat. The cat seemed to understand what was about to happen and proactively leaned its head over. Finger pointing between the big cat's eyebrows. In an instant, the heat flow surged and flowed all the way through the blood pump, overflowing from the fingertips. Even though he had experienced it many times, the feeling of his soul shaking and soaring still gave Gu Shouya goosebumps. In a moment, he exhaled a long breath and, after the heat flowed out to the size of a water droplet, he tried his best to control it and let go of his hand. Meow. The big white cat let out a soft cry, then fell to the ground lazily, stretching its limbs. Under the sunshine, the pure white fur surpasses the snow, as if surging waves, reflecting a brilliant light. Gu Xiuya measured with his hands and found that the wild cat he had picked up had grown almost 2 meters in length, with limbs close to human arms. Go fetch water. The big white cat jumped up to the wall, grabbed the tin bucket in its mouth, and ran out of the door. Gu Xiuya nodded in satisfaction and picked up the wild rabbit, ready to enter the house to deal with it. As soon as I walked into the backyard, voices came from outside the Taoist temple. Gu, have you woken up yet? Upon hearing this poor Far Eastern dialect, Gu Xiuya knew who came. Marn Jonas, the legal representative of the Church of Grandtown. Manager of local Semitic faith assembly group, with the title of priest and acting priest. Talent. MLM, passive. Stacking armor. Having multiple comprehensive anti-armor buffs such as minority, vegetarian, and feminist supporters. Unfortunately, the world is still in the mid-18th century, so all of Marn's buffs are temporarily in a gray inactive state. Otherwise, this one would have become a great weapon. Half a year ago, caught off guard, Gu Xiuya met Ma En while inquiring about the surrounding situation. The leader of the Minzong in Galen's town heard that Gu Xiuya came from the Far East and unfortunately got separated from his employer in Lankaport. In his conversation, he also had a good understanding of foreign teachers. He waved his hand and exercised the power of the local snake, lending his deceased friend's church, Shantian Temple, to Gu Xiuya for residence. Gu, I brought you some potatoes and also brought a guest. The voices came again. Gu Xiuya glanced at the wild rabbit in his hand, buried it in the snow with the willow blade, wiped his hands, and walked out. Marn had already entered the Taoist temple, accompanied by a blond man in a suit, leather shoes, and a gentleman's hat. The two stood under the big locust tree in the courtyard, avoiding the noisy snowflakes. In the town of Galens, suits are considered luxury goods. Most people here don't even have the concept of work clothes, whether it's farming or going to church, they dress the same, the only difference is whether they wash or not. There is a carriage parked outside the Taoist temple, with a 4-meter-long body that is exquisitely crafted. Not to mention the visible silver corners and brass accessories, just the white iron wheels and bearings are enough to demonstrate its high cost. Beside the carriage were several tall men in cloaks, one of whom, with a mustache, was holding a flint gun in his hand, silently staring at Gu Xiuya with an undisguised scrutiny in his eyes. Oh, it seems like a nobleman. Gu Xiuya turned his head and glanced more at the blond man, causing him to take off his hat and bend down, giving a slight bow. He had no interest in returning the gift and just said to Marn, I don't deliver in the morning. Of course, I remember the taboos of Far Easterners. Marn placed the sack in his hand beside him and rubbed his hands, sighing, don't worry, this is not a delivery. So I guess things must be more complicated. Gu Xiuya said. The old priest choked and scratched his head, saying, Gu, remember what you often say. Give me face. Thinking of Ma En's daughter, Gu Xiuya reluctantly agreed to this reason. What's up? He asked. Marn reached out and gestured to the blond man next to him, this is Mr. Davis, Finch Davis. He wants to see you for a consultation. For the past 6 months, Gu Xiuya has served as the only doctor in the town of Galens, relying on the blessings that can stimulate the potential of others and the barefoot medical skills passed down from his great-grandfather. This is not because of his medical skills, but because other colleagues in this era were too narrow-minded. The current development of medicine is suffocating, and the representatives of cutting-edge medical technology are generally either hairdressers or butchers. Both almost cover all surgical procedures. Big enough to open the skull with a hammer and poke the prefrontal lobe with iron wire, from sawing legs and chopping hands, to using red charcoal to stop bleeding on cracked lower limb pouch-like skin. There is nothing that people can't imagine, nothing they dare not do. As for the internal medicine department, what is internal medicine? If bloodletting and poisoning are also considered internal medicine, Gu Xiuya is willing to admit that Western medicine is budding in the right direction. In summary, the people of Galans who had no choice were extremely supportive of Gu Xiuya, a doctor from the Far East. Because his treatment may be ineffective, but he will never die. Marn also thought the same, so he brought Davis. Mr. Davis's father was an earl and is currently pushing for a bill reform on religious management. He said to Gu Xiuya. Gu Xiuya understood Ma'an's subtext. The son of the direct supervisor. Please forgive my intrusion, father. The blond man looked a bit tired as he spoke with a bitter smile. You may not believe me when it comes to speaking, I'm almost dead. It can't be cured. Gu Xiuya detests any trouble that goes beyond the plan without any additional benefits, and at the beginning, he firmly refuses. Davis was choked on. But soon he bowed persistently and said, Father, I have no other choice. Please grant me the magical blessings of the Far East. Gu Xiuya turned his head to look at Ma'an. Marn felt a bit embarrassed and said, Gu, you know, sometimes I have to compromise with secular rules in order to serve the Heavenly Father for a long time. He threatened me with his father, I can only tell him. Gu Xiuya can understand Ma'an's difficulties, but he does not intend to easily give what belongs to him. Even if it's not something good. He just glanced at Davis and said calmly, Young man, it's the 18th century now, you should learn to believe in science. After speaking, Gu Xiuya turned around and walked towards the inner courtyard. Davis was momentarily taken aback and quickly grabbed a box from his subordinate's arms. Father, I beg you. The wooden long box was pulled open. The bright yellow light was dazzling and captivating under the sunlight, and the crisp impact made Marn exclaim in surprise. Hundreds of gold coins. A huge sum of nearly half a year's worth of tax revenue in Galans town. Gu Xiuya ignored it and walked slowly into the front hall. That's why I don't like Far Easterners, they always take themselves too seriously. The little mustache holding a flint gun shrugged his shoulders and jumped down from the shaft. He hooked his finger on the trigger and made a beautiful move, with the muzzle pointing towards Gu Xiuya's back. Black-haired boy, you should say to Mr. Baron. Woo. Dong. The bucket falls to the ground. Pang Rant's shadow suddenly crossed the wall, as fast as lightning, blocking the sunlight in an instant. Amidst the howling wind, shiny hair brushed past Gu Xiuya's eyes. A long red stripe sprayed fiercely on the white snow. A bloody smell immediately surged out. Click, 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 click. The sound of bones and muscles being crushed and bitten was heard, accompanied by a toothy scraping sound. That's the noise of sharp teeth piercing through the iron sheet. Davis widened his eyes. The Heavenly Father is above. What kind of monster is this? It ate half of Rand's hand. Protect the Baron. The people next to the carriage were frantically raising their swords and flint guns and rushing in, their screams of fear even overshadowing the screams of Little Beard. The big cat hunched its back and lay beside Gu Xiuya, showing its sharp teeth. A low growl sounded in its throat, and it coldly looked around at the two-legged beasts that had invaded the territory. Your people have scared my cat. Gu Xiuya suddenly spoke up. Davis's emerald pupils were jumping wildly, and he wanted to say that the cat was the one who started. But reason kept him silent. He came to seek medical treatment, not to add enemies to himself. The correct approach is to use compromise and tolerance to suppress conflicts, rather than being impulsive and leading to escalation of the situation. Moreover, he was not sure if this Maine cat, which was as large as an adult man, could bite off its own head before the gunshot. Marn was completely bewildered, biting his lips tightly for a while before calming down. The blood and severed hand made him already think of the possible consequences that could happen next, and Marn felt very guilty about it. Gu, I'm very sorry. Gu Xiuya glanced at the big cat next to him and gently untied the straps of his Taoist robe, revealing the concise and short strokes inside. "It's okay, Marn, it's not a big deal." Marn opened his mouth wide. He stared blankly at the two close-fitting short blades on Gu Xiuya's back, only to suddenly realize that the young people he thought he knew were not as humble and peaceful as he thought. Davis quickly raised his hand, trying to ease the relationship between the two sides. "Father, I think we should have a good conversation." Gu Xiuya did not respond. Davis gritted his teeth and took out his final chips in advance. "I heard that you were searching for something related to ancient legends, and I happened to come across something. It's a very magical thing." Gu Xiuya's fingers on his lower back paused slightly. In a moment, he put down his hand and said, "Symptoms." Davis finally breathed a sigh of relief and quickly waved his hand to signal everyone to put down their weapons. Then, he asked someone to help Little Beard out for bandages and clean the blood stains on the ground. From beginning to end, he didn't say a word of comfort to the injured subordinate. It wasn't that Davis was heartless, but that he had to use it to show his attitude to Gu Xiuya. "Everything is up to my subordinates to make their own decisions, and I am unaware of it and will not forgive him. It is impossible to hold accountable, and there is no one dead. There is no need to offend one's last hope with one hand." When the atmosphere was no longer tense, he pulled Gu Xiuya aside and took out the box filled with gold coins just now. "Please allow me to pay my respects to your deity." Davis spoke very subtly. Gu Xiuya picked it up casually, but paused slightly when he touched the box. He raised his head and asked with a hint, "Coins? You are indeed wise as a torch. That ancient item is indeed a gold coin." Davis replied with a smile. Gu Xiuya's sensitivity gave him a little more confidence in this trip. He turned to the main topic and said, "According to Marn, the magical blessings of the Far East seem to empower others and help pregnant women with heavy bleeding stop bleeding. Is this true?" Gu Xiuya frowned and looked at Davis's neck. "Please don't look at me like that. The reason I'm asking this is not to have a child." "What is that?" "I don't know." Davis shook his head, his eyes mixed with fear and confusion. "I only know. He's in my stomach." Davis's voice was very low, and there was an uncontrollable fear lurking in his rambling narration. That is a bizarre scene that ordinary people find difficult to imagine. Just imagining it makes one's hair stand on end. Gu Xiuya repeated this unique syllable in her heart and slowly touched her index finger. He didn't show any emotions, just quietly raised his hand and his eyelids drooped slightly. Heat is summoned and bursts forth in the blood. Next up. The gentle force driven by the arm thousands of times suddenly became restless at this moment. Its speed even surpasses thoughts. Before the microelectric signal could give instructions to the neurons, the raging heat wave broke through the blockade of consciousness, wanting to separate the flesh and blood and manifest in the world. Fortunately, the conditioned reflex developed through long-term practice takes effect autonomously at this moment, replacing the consciousness of not having time to react in curling fingers tightly. The passage disappeared, and the turbulent heat lingered on the back of the palm for a moment, finally calming down. Gu Xiuya kept clenching his fists and remained silent, but his heart was filled with waves. Resonance characteristics. Sure enough, it's something similar. This book is also known as The Unknown Time Traveler. The historical phantom of the Cthulhu world tells the story of the 21st century travelers who change history, influence reality, reveal the truth of the world, and finally become indescribable, because many people roast that the information in the previous chapters is too little, so here's a description. Sorry. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. List of Strange Tales. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. List of Strange Tales. 6 months of exploration were fruitless, but when he was about to give up, he coincidentally met him head-on to the extreme. Gu Xiuya couldn't explain what his current mood was. Easy. Excited. Perhaps it's okay, but more of it is bound to be uneasy. Putting aside the chance encounter 6 months ago, it doesn't count as good luck. Today, it will be his first time facing something beyond human cognition. Despite Davis appearing healthy and normal on the surface, the underlying transformation may have already quietly occurred. The one who knows neither good nor evil in Davis's belly is far beyond the analysis and understanding of the scarce knowledge accumulated by mortals for thousands of years. They existed before the birth of life, forever standing like stars in the world. Even if only a few remnants remain today, there is still infinite vastness and grandeur. The barren senses forged with flesh and blood have no way of seeing their true appearance. Once an ordinary person encounters them, the only thing they can do is to run away wildly, hoping to survive for a while. And he, on the other hand, tries to deal with it in vain, even hoping to capture it. The life after traveling is truly unexpected and exciting. Father, isn't it very troublesome? Davis caught a glimpse of Gu Xiuya's face changing, a little nervous, and couldn't help but ask. Gu Xiuya didn't speak, just touched his fingers. After a while, he lifted his head and asked, "When did you find it?" "Half a year ago. That's when I came into this world." "What a coincidence." Gu Xiuya's mind flashed with a black diamond-shaped imprint pattern on a book page, and he asked, "Why do you say he's in your stomach?" "I had a dream, in which a ray of light penetrated into my belly, a brilliant color I had never seen before. I don't know how to describe it, it was more beautiful than any known color in the world, but the feeling it gave me was even more terrifying than the most vicious curse. Since then, I have been suffering from insomnia and becoming increasingly drowsy. Sometimes, I don't even know how I fell asleep or when I woke up. My maid told me that she had seen me sit at the bedside with my eyes open multiple times, staring blankly in front of her for a long time, until she woke me up. But I don't remember all of this. Father, I really don't know how to describe that feeling to you, that feeling. Like someone took away my consciousness." Gu Xiuya listened quietly without any expression. Drowsiness, auditory hallucinations, inattention, loss of consciousness, delirium, and other mental changes are significant characteristics of the transformation process. If something from the sea wants to land, the first thing to do is to evolve the respiratory organs that it relies on for survival. Or to crawl into the belly of a large creature, use its body to breathe, absorb its nutrients, grow up, and become the new one in its flesh and blood. Gu Xiuya recalled a conversation he overheard half a year ago. If the other party's theory was correct, the contents of Davis's stomach should be a kind of ashes. His ashes. From a broad perspective, this is not a big problem. Everything comes at a cost. Ashes enter the body to gain new life, at the cost of bearing the inherent weaknesses of the shell creatures. Of course, as time passes, these weaknesses will eventually become less lethal in the transformation and disappear. But as long as the action is fast enough, there are many ways to treat it accordingly. The problem is that Gu Xiuya doesn't know. So a small trouble becomes a big trouble. He had originally thought of testing the condition of that thing, but now he quickly extinguished his thoughts. "I need someone to help me prepare. You can rest here first." Davis was slightly surprised and couldn't help but glance at the Taoist temple behind him. "Is there anyone else in this church? How long will it take?" Gu Xiuya didn't look back and said, "Very soon." Creak, the wooden door slammed shut, blocking Davis's view. The tap water, which had been quiet all along, suddenly jumped up high, and its huge body gently landed in front of the main hall, almost silent. Facing each other, Davis saw the big cat yawning and curled up, glancing at him with only one eye, with a hint of eagerness to try. He was startled and quickly retreated to the carriage seat, sitting next to the crowd. Time is anxiously waiting. Davis remained silent for a moment, but couldn't help but fold his hands and start praying. He will eventually come, lifting the lowly from their lowliness. For his Holy Spirit, all things will be reborn in his kingdom, ascend to heaven, no more suffering, and merge into one. Almighty Father, please lower your mercy. On the other side. Gu Xiuya walked into the main hall, dusted his robe and wrapped his sleeves, took 3 homemade incense sticks and lit them. Shantian Temple, as its name suggests, is a dojo dedicated to the Holy Mother of Shantian. This person's fame can be traced back to the 8th year of the Zhenyuan reign of the Tang dynasty, where she was responsible for maternal and child health care, as well as ensuring safe and smooth childbirth. Part-time it seems like there aren't any other powerful positions left. Forget it, I've already clicked. After offering incense for half a year, it will eventually come in handy. Gu Xiuya comforted himself in his heart, although he had never understood why there was such a Taoist temple with a different painting style standing on the territory of the Western barbarians. But this did not prevent him from hugging Buddha's feet temporarily. Since crossing time, there have been too many strange things that cannot be understood, which have already made people numb and lazy to delve deeper. Inserting incense into the incense table, Gu Xiuya murmured and took out a book as big as a slab from his pocket. The quaint thread-bound book is wrapped in some unknown leather, perhaps due to its age. Most of the pages have disappeared, leaving only a few yellowed old papers hanging on cotton thread. Exhaled and passed by, almost ready to fall off. Gu Xiuya held his breath and opened the leather, spreading it flat on the ground, revealing the 4 large characters on it. List of Strange Tales. The book is divided into 2 volumes. The first volume is Observing Immortals, the second volume is Zhan Shen. There is no text on the page after the name, only a black diamond mark like a child's graffiti fills the blank space completely. Gu Xiuya lowered his head and saw a diamond-shaped mark on the first page of the Observing Immortals volume, which was slightly glowing. The white radiance reminded him of that uncomfortable experience earlier. Compared to the terrifying world in Observing Immortals, this place is now like a low difficulty and peaceful development zone. Gu Xiuya sighed in his heart as he saw several diamond-shaped lights on the first page of the Zhan Shen volume, with varying shades and patterns. I don't know if it's an illusion or something, but he always felt that the black mark under the dim light was slowly wriggling. Each diamond mark represents an extraordinary trait associated with me that has been recorded, and its brightness represents approximate intensity. The first imprint is the brightest and can feel a slight resonance, obviously something that comes from the world of Observing Immortals in my body. The second one is slightly weaker, it should be something in the gold coin. The third one is the darkest, it's Marn's daughter. The fourth one How could there be a fourth one? Signed, starting today, 4K per day. This book has a complete outline and will not be interrupted. Please rest assured to collect and read it. Seeking follow-up reading. Follow-up reading is related to how long this book can be written. Readers must turn to the last page. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Authenticity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Authenticity. Gu Xiuya's heart skipped a beat. Where exactly do the extra marks come from? Is it Davis? No, so far I haven't had any real contact with him, and the power inside him cannot be captured by the strange tales. What did I overlook? Gu Xiuya suddenly heard a commotion coming from outside the door. He turned his head and saw many residents standing outside the Taoist temple exploring their heads through the cracks in the carved window. They are all the Galen's people and their families who have chosen to receive the blessings of the Far East at a critical moment of life and death. Gu, do you need any help? These people seem ill-intentioned. Bert, you are the captain of the militia, but please protect our doctors. It's my job. Everyone, please show me your family emblem. Reverend Marn. Get out. Marn approached expressionlessly and drove out the honest guys who had suddenly visited and were hiding shovels and hoes behind their backs. Is it them? Gu Xiuya remembered the experiment he had conducted in the past 6 months. In this remote town without obstetricians and matched blood, sudden heavy bleeding during childbirth has always been equated with death. Until the arrival of Gu Xiuya. I have a unique Far Eastern blessing that can temporarily enhance a person's recovery ability, but I am not sure what consequences this will bring. You can consider accepting it. Gu Xiuya will make a serious statement to everyone who comes, but everyone's decision is the same in the end. When facing death, choosing a treatment that has no obvious side effects can lead to a healthy survival of at least 6 months or even longer. This is a multiple-choice question that is known without asking. People in danger never worry about possible troubles in the future. Now, the side effects have finally emerged. Gu Xiuya frowned slightly. He had originally intended to create as many samples as possible for comparison, in order to understand his own situation, before generously giving what he called blessings. Unfortunately, Davis suddenly brought a time bomb to his door, which directly disrupted his plan. Even if the phased achievements are within reach, he doesn't have extra time to explore the truth. The degree of transformation will deepen over time, and for every minute of delay, the danger will increase by 1 point. That ghost hiding in Davis's belly doesn't know how to talk about martial arts. Anyway, having an extra imprint is beneficial and harmless to me. In this way, all I need to do is dispose of Davis's contents, and I can gather all 5 imprints and freely enter and exit. Gu Xiuya's mind was spinning and he decided to leave the problem to be solved later. He placed his hand on his own diamond mark, spoke softly, and recited the obscure prayers that had appeared in his mind countless times. There is a holy heavenly sovereign who does not follow without prayer. Yuanshan divides the fields, and the star system stands out. Lin. Boom. On another level that is invisible to ordinary people, endless radiance appears between Gu Xiuya's fingers. The light appeared strange and profound, but it gave off an incredibly holy feeling, as if the first sunny day after a heavy snowfall had shed enough warmth to make the soul tremble in the world. That is a brilliant color that does not belong to this world, so brilliant that it cannot be described in human pale language, nor can it be understood by human impoverished knowledge. If Davis could see this scene, he would definitely be extremely frightened. The strange light that slowly flowed like a living creature, gradually enveloping Gu Xiuya, was almost identical to what he had seen in his dream. At some moment, Gu Xiuya's figure disappeared from the light. But just a moment later, it reappeared. Sigh. The tap water outside seemed to be noticeable, and a hint of confusion appeared in the amber-colored pupils. Davis saw the reaction of tap water and instinctively asked, "Father. Come on in." The tap water moved at the sound and took the lead in extending a front paw to open the door. It saw Gu Xiuya standing in the center of the hall and quickly ran over, gently rubbing his head against his waist. Gu Xiuya reached out and brushed the back of the big cat, eliciting a lively response. Davis followed closely into the main hall and found that Gu Xiuya had already taken off his robe and was wearing only a short shirt, with an additional box beside him. A strange, exquisite, and unseen rectangular iron box. He looked up at Gu Xiuya and only then did he notice that his face had become somewhat tired at some point. Davis couldn't help but ask, "Father, are you okay?" "It's nothing." Gu Xiuya spoke up and said, "Davis, there's something I want to ask you. Why do you believe that I can save you?" Davis paused for a moment and smiled bitterly, as I said, "Father, I have no other choice." Gu Xiuya looked at him and said, "You're lying." Davis's eyes flashed with a hint of nervousness. I didn't wait for him to explain. A willow leaf knife tilted upwards, instantly cutting open a crimson blood line. Cough. Davis panicked and reached out to cover his throat, but to no avail. Blood quickly gushed out through his fingers. He widened his eyes in fear, like a fish lacking water, and his gaze towards Gu Xiuya was full of disbelief. "Next time we meet, be honest with me." Gu Xiuya's face didn't have many expressions. He has never been the kind of person who chooses to put himself in danger in order to protect others. Excessive kindness and compassion are not suitable for this world. Faced with an unknown terrifying existence, He must do his best to gain all advantages in order to have the possibility of success. Killing the host can quickly interrupt the transformation process, backfire on the parasite, and weaken its strength, making it the current optimal choice. Davis quickly stopped breathing. Without hesitation, Gu Xiuya opened the palace door and kicked the body out. This action instantly caused a scream, followed by the sound of swords unsheathed and flint guns loaded. Gu Xiuya seemed unaware and carried the box away from Davis's body. The next moment, an indescribable hazy color emerged from the surface of Davis, transforming into a strange light that spread its teeth and claws, enveloping the entire Taoist temple in the blink of an eye. The clay statue of the goddess of Shantian, which was originally benevolent in appearance, also showed a hint of strangeness in the light. Angry aristocratic servants rushed over, shouting in anger, wanting to dismember the murderer, but suddenly stiffened and their figures faded and then became thinner as they were about to charge into the main hall. Until dissolved in air and disappeared. Gu Xiuya felt a gentle breeze. The wind is silent, turning into waves, spreading all tangible things, erasing the surface of hypocrisy, leaving only reality. In a peaceful world, the curtain that covers countless ugliness and strangeness shatters in the wind. The tap water rushed up, the hair exploded, and the spine arched fiercely. Looking out of the main hall, a low growl came from the throat. The world suddenly fell silent, with tiny black dust falling from the sky like cow hair. Gu Xiuya closed his eyes and opened them again. It's starting. Do you have any friends who like this type of book? Single player is so painful, seeking interaction and following up on reading. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Objects that cannot be viewed directly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Objects that cannot be viewed directly. The world sheds its beautiful cloak in tranquility, leaving only the grotesque and terrifying ugly entity. As if day and night had changed in an instant, the sunlight cast by the bright tiles disappeared, and darkness became the main color tone in sight. The roughness and mediocrity of human senses are exposed at this moment, making it difficult for the brain to thoroughly analyze the images captured by the eyes. The forehead begins to heat up, causing the gaze to become twisted and strange. Gu Xiuya saw the door slowly stretching into a strip behind him, and a hazy mist grew in front of him. The main hall gradually became damp, and the solemn statue's face twisted, dragging down large pieces of black and red mud. This is not a complete illusion, but more like a sign that contains complex information, a sign that the human brain cannot fully understand. Buzz. A mixed noise suddenly struck, as if countless people were grabbing his head and shouting loudly in their ears. Sharp voices frantically burrowed into his mind, and his consciousness felt like he was about to leave. Fine dots of light began to appear in front of him. All of this may seem complicated, but in reality, it only happens in an instant. What is terrifying is that when Gu Xiuya regained his senses, his chaotic senses told him that a long time had passed. He gritted his teeth and frowned, trying to gather his energy. But at this moment, consciousness lost its subjective initiative. Even if he gritted his teeth and his temples were bulging with veins, his eyes were still blurry and his head was dizzy, as if he would fall asleep the next moment. Is it still not possible? Gu Xiuya gave up trying and decided not to force herself anymore. He lifted his hand, and the heat surged with his thoughts, spreading throughout his body. As if covered in a protective film, all crazy and terrifying noises are repelled and distant by invisible forces. The frontal temperature gradually returned to normal, the gray matter became pleasurable under the comfort of heat flow, and the strange situations in the vision began to change towards relatively cognitive categories. Although it still violates geometric principles, it is no longer uncomfortable. Gu Xiuya found that his body seemed to increasingly enjoy the feeling of heat flowing around. It is like a universal elixir, ignoring the vast barrier of genes, injecting infinite vitality into the weak body and bringing what life craves the most. Evolution. The word flashed through his mind, and Gu Xiuya suddenly felt a slight bump on the ground. He quickly retreated and looked down, only to find that it was not an imagined monster, but a small, withered ordinary tree root. Has the locust tree in the vestibule grown here yet? Gu Xiuya couldn't help but turn around and glanced at the Shantian Holy Mother in the main hall. At this moment, he inexplicably felt a realization in his heart. This insignificant and coincidental tree root, which happened to be discovered by him at this moment, may be some kind of enlightenment from somewhere else. It silently declares that the development of all things is never based on human will and preferences. Just like the roots that have already begun to scratch. It may have started spreading countless days and nights ago, until the earth could no longer bear its endless forks, and eventually broke through and encroached on the surface. Similarly, the things inside him. The sky is getting darker and darker. Gu Xiuya suddenly felt like she heard something. It's like the strange noise generated by twisting rusty gears, or the piercing sound of transparent tape being pulled to its limit. Harsh yet subtle, full of a sense of strangeness that goes against logic. If it weren't for the heat flow strengthening the five senses, making Gu Xiuya confident that he had not heard anything wrong, he might have regarded it as a hallucination produced in the quiet darkness. Gu Xiuya slowly turned his head left and right, comparing the strength of the sound, and found that the sound source was right in front of him, less than 10 meters away, and was slowly approaching. It's Davis, or something inside Davis. The death of the host clearly brought enormous trouble to it, to the extent that the innate ability to enter the real realm also requires such a long time to prepare. No, it may not be fully prepared yet. The conversion was ultimately interrupted, it is now only a semi-finished product. Gu Xiuya shouted out loud, "Take action." The tap water, which had been lurking in the darkness early on, suddenly jumped out, and its massive body was as fast as lightning, biting into something in the darkness. The faint sound of flesh and blood being torn apart by sharp teeth rang out, followed by the collision of entanglements and the occasional roar of the big cat. Gu Xiuya did not take it lightly, even semi-finished products are not something that can be easily solved. He quickly opened his suitcase and grabbed something. Almost at this moment, the tap water sobbed in pain and flew out backwards. Gu Xiuya felt some kind of liquid sprinkled on him, and he didn't have time to check, so he raised his hand and threw it fiercely. Bang! Bright flames flickered and thick white smoke fluttered. The flames burst forth in an instant. High temperature is the archenemy of all flesh and blood bodies. White phosphorus completely ignites the thickened gasoline, and the scorching heat of up to 900 degrees destroys it, burning a humanoid torch in the blink of an eye. Meow. Gu Xiuya heard a weak sob and turned his head to see the tap water lying on the ground, his spine curved, and large patches of hair disappearing, revealing a 2-foot-long, uneven concave flesh and blood gap. Even though it was injured like this, it still bit its half-blood-eaten flesh-blurred palm tightly in its mouth. Davis's palm. There are granulation buds wriggling on the metacarpal bone, twisting and growing into a claw covered in black nodules, but soon it begins to shrink again, like a plant lacking water after leaving its mother's body, rapidly withering and withering. Gu Xiuya silently wiped her face, her palms turning crimson. Just a face-to-face encounter, he lost his greatest helper. With the sensitivity of feline animals, tap water should not have been so easily injured, but it was eager to protect its owner, even abandoning its instincts and choosing the most aggressive attack method, exchanging injuries for injuries. Thank you for your hard work. Gu Xiuya turned his head and flames reflected in his pupils. With the help of light, he saw clearly what was in the darkness. That is a crawling worm of the Gosazi. It looks like a human, but shorter than a human. It has one less leg and is lying on the ground like a peeled dragon fruit. Its skin is nowhere to be seen, covered in black-red, wriggling tumors. The beige fat and pale tendons were exposed to the air, sizzling under the flames. The flesh and blood were carbonized by the high temperature, constantly turning into black blocks and falling off. However, it seemed to have no pain, allowing the flames to burn and landing on all fours at an incredible speed, rushing towards it. The distance instantly drew closer, and Gu Xiuya saw countless lush blood vessels. They dance wildly on the surface of the reptile body, like red snakes, as if they have self-awareness, constantly spreading around, entangled with each other, shaking off flames. His forehead was once again boiling hot, and Gu Xiuya suddenly felt an uncontrollable horror at this scene. He cannot explain the origin of this emotion, but he can truly feel it. Just like thoughts that arise without authorization beyond subjective consciousness, silently revealing memories hidden deep within genes with the purest physiological disgust. That memory, cold and terrifying, crazily warned him in silence. Do not look directly at me. Do not look directly at me. Do not look directly at me. Gu Xiuya's eyes widened desperately, his teeth clenched, and he grabbed two uniquely shaped short blades from the box. Without retreating, he advanced forward towards the monster with a single blow. Damn you, don't look directly at me. The plot of this chapter takes place in the real world, which is similar to the inner world in Silence Ridge, and will be explained in detail later. Because some readers have not contacted Cthulhu, please give a special hint. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Ashes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Ashes Dong. Originating from one of the highest human craftsmanship, the cold steel knife struck the target, causing the monster to stumble violently in an instant. Gu Xiuya was also pushed back 1 meter away by the impact, but he didn't care at all about the pain caused by the impact on his internal organs, and his face only had a ferocious joy. Semi-finished product, it's just a weak semi-finished product. Kill it. Gu Xiuya fought against fear with extreme arrogance, and his backhand was another blow. Dong! The monster had just raised its other paw and wanted to counterattack, but was immediately knocked back a few steps. It is obvious that it has not fully adapted to this body yet, to the point where its movements appear slightly stiff, and coupled with the absence of a forelimb at birth, various disadvantages add up, forcing it to bend to the disadvantage. The double swords that rained down did not give it any chance, overwhelming all the room for movement. Long-term exercise finally came into play at this moment, with abundant physical strength supporting Gu Xiuya's crazy slashing, vowing to chop what was in front of him into meat sauce. There are no tricks to follow, only pure power. The blood vessels dancing wildly broke under the blade, and the crimson flesh and blood continued to shatter. Fat splattered out, and various liquids spilled all over the ground. Gu Xiuya once felt that as long as he continued to chop, he would keep chopping. You can kill this ugly ghost with just one knife. Until he felt his arms start to tremble. Almost at the same time. The monster, which had been suppressed all along, seized the opportunity and opened its sharp mouthpiece, emitting a roar at Gu Xiuya. Buzz. It's like thousands of flies fluttering in your ears, or like the busy noise caused by overload of electrical components. The frantic syllables, with some eerie vibration, broke through the protection of heat flow and rushed into the mind, approaching the soul. His head drooped uncontrollably, and Gu Xiuya felt as if he had drifted up, feeling lost as if his soul was detached. In front of me was a snowflake-like noise, and my consciousness was almost destroyed by this wild noise. I don't know how long it has been. Gu Xiuya snapped out of the excruciating pain and saw a bloody mouth. Blood sprayed in front of his eyes, and the broken bones flew to the left and right. The crimson flesh splattered out under the pressure of his sharp teeth, sticking to his forehead with a clatter. The thing rolling between the sharp teeth that kept biting was undoubtedly the half of his left metacarpal bone that once belonged to him. Gu Xiuya was in pain and broke out in a cold sweat, seeing the monster's eyes within reach. Those eyes have no pupils, no eye whites, only a pitch-black void. This is a blind and foolish beast, it doesn't even have emotions, maybe even a mind. It just relies on its physical instincts to easily defeat humans. Gu Xiuya felt like her ribs were about to break. The monster pressed him to the ground with its forelimbs, with immense strength. As the blood loss increased, even breathing began to become difficult. However, even in such a desperate situation deep down, there was still no hint of fear in his eyes. He just stared coldly at the monster in front of him, slowed down his breathing, and clenched his short blade in his right hand, as if waiting for something. 1 second, 2 seconds woo. The tap water suddenly rushed towards him, and in Gu Xiuya's stunned eyes, he used all his strength to fiercely collide with the monster. Dong! Gu Xiuya heard the sound of bones breaking. The monster was thrown out, and the tap water whimpered before falling to the ground with a loud roar. It looked at Gu Xiuya with a bright light shining in its pupils, as if telling its owner to live on. Gu Xiuya suddenly remembered a sentence he had read somewhere. Out of 1,000 kittens, only one will love its owner deeply. He remained silent, trembling slightly as he took a breath, seized the opportunity and got up with his hands and feet. The shattered left hand suddenly began to stop bleeding, and the displaced internal organs in the collision gradually returned. It seemed that something invisible was surging on Gu Xiuya's body, accompanied by a frenzy. The monster, standing on the ground, felt threatened and immediately wanted to roar again, attacking Gu Xiuya's mind. But when it opens its mouth, it cannot make any sound. In the mouth full of sharp teeth, there was a faint and magnificent light that was not of human color floating, intertwined, split, piled up, and blocked the throat. Is it delicious? Gu Xiuya clenched his knife tightly and lifted his foot forward. The monster twisted its head wildly, trying to spit out what was in its mouth, but in vain. The floating light has already flowed along the capsule cavity, slowly surging deeper. It frantically pounded the ground, turned its head, and wanted to rush over to kill Gu Xiuya first. However, before it could take action, the hind legs that were used to support the ground suddenly twitched eerily, interrupting its movements. Subsequently, this convulsion quickly spread throughout the body, making it difficult to maintain even basic standing and stumbling to the ground. There was no surprise in Gu Xiuya's eyes. He slowly lifted the knife. The blade emitted a faint light. The fierce toxin, originating from ancient marine snails, has completed its invasion through countless slashes and hits, and finally has its rightful effect at this moment. There is no toxin in nature that can take effect at a speed comparable to its own. It is cold and deadly, enough to penetrate the weakest flaw of primates. Nerves. This mixed biological venom contains hundreds of different types of toxicity and can attack different targets upon entering the body. Even so, called remaining creatures are not easy to adapt to and be immune to this pain. Not to mention a semi-finished product. Gu Xiuya closed his eyes and felt the heat surging in his blood vessels, hooking up with the split body in the monster's flesh and blood. In just half a minute, the massive heat flow condensed in his right hand had already absorbed enough nutrients, like a vine plant, growing countless roots and spreading wildly to every corner. The misty light surged within the monster's body and quickly accumulated in the most delicious place. There is a sarcoma there. A tumor growing in the chest cavity, as black as ashes. Ashes. Gu Xiuya opened his eyes and swung his knife to strike. Dong! The blade got stuck in the bone. Gu Xiuya breathed a sigh and kicked towards the handle of the knife. Bang! 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 Amidst the muffled noise, the blade gradually penetrated the monster's body, squeezing out large amounts of yellow and white liquid. The convulsing blood vessels were waving to protect the body, but it was difficult to succeed due to paralysis. Gu Xiuya pulled off several blood vessels that were attached to his clothes, turned around, picked up his suitcase, and suddenly smashed it down. When the powerful impact on the handle of the knife shattered the ribs. He saw a familiar light shining through the broken bone, so he released the box, reached out and poked into his chest. After several gropes, he grabbed a slippery meatball. The next moment, this thing that felt like the mouth of a bull quickly collapsed into nothingness in his hand. At the same time, the light inside the monster spontaneously wrapped around its fingers, transforming into heat and returning to its original position in excitement. Gu Xiuya could feel that there were still many ashes near his palm, and the one he stole was not even the largest. But he no longer had the energy to deal with it, and the monster's struggle became increasingly powerful, clearly on the verge of recovering from paralysis, dragging on only a dead end. He quickly withdrew his hand, stumbled and ran over to grab the tap water, then grabbed the gold coin box that had been thrown on the ground before, and then took out the strange tail from his shirt and threw it to the ground. The page opens, and the 5th diamond mark has already lit up, shining brightly. There is a holy heavenly sovereign who does not follow without prayer. Yuanshan divides the fields, and the star system stands out. Lin. Hu. In the flowing light of the stars turning upside down, Gu Xiuya discovered for the first time that an instant can also be so long. The dizziness caused by blood loss and fatigue almost made him fall asleep several times. He tried to keep his eyes open until, in a daze, he saw the stars fading, the blue sky emerging, and a surprised face appeared in front of him. Gu Xiuya used his last strength to grab a handful of yellow and clear gold coins. Save my cat. Yuanshan Feni, stars entwine and stand out. It is a spell that activates the teleportation ability in a series of strange spells, so the appearance of this sentence indicates that the protagonist has left the story and gone to a new place. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Return. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Return. Gu Xiuya had a dream. He dreamed that he transformed into a hazy light, rising with the wind and throwing himself into the sky. Here, the sun and moon are hidden together, the sky and earth have no light, and the vast fog churns endlessly. A certain majestic silhouette can be vaguely seen, fluctuating in the mist. Gu Xiuya turned around and saw something standing behind him that had always pierced through heaven and earth, without seeing the beginning or the end. That is a huge, rusty bronze ruler. It is adorned with patterns of animals and birds, as well as strange birds and insects, with a wide variety of categories and an endless range of orders. On one side of the ruler, there is a large character called 1. On the other side, there is a dividing line and 2 characters for the book. 10,000 zhang. In a daze, a bright light falls and cuts through the thick fog. The sky suddenly lit up. Gu Xiuya opened his eyes and saw the sunlight passing through the window, sprinkling on his face. His first thought was to confirm the condition of the big cat, and then he sensed that the heat flow in the tap water was still active. He breathed a sigh of relief and looked around. He soon realized that he had left that eerie place and was lying on a hospital bed, with the rising sun in front of him. Tiny floating dust drifted in front of us, and there were bursts of lively bird chirping outside the window. Children's laughter was accompanied by greetings, and we could vaguely hear the distant bell ringing for class. He walked out of bed, opened the curtains, and saw a vibrant landscape of flowers and plants. A gentle breeze blew, and the moist morning air rushed towards me, as if it had a faint floral fragrance. A peaceful spring. Gu Xiuya was a bit lost in thought. From crossing over to this world, more than half a year has passed unnoticed. For the past 6 months, he has been forced to travel to various eerie and dangerous places in order to survive, and has never had leisure to rest. Today, he felt for the first time that this new world, located in an unfamiliar universe, was once as peaceful as his hometown. This is the calmness he yearns for. It is also his rare calmness. Gu Xiuya withdrew his gaze, reached out and unbuttoned his hospital uniform, and took out the strange tail from under his chest. This ancient book, which is invisible to others, is not a material entity. It is more like a conceptual thing that always exists in the chest position. As long as you make a take action, it will appear in your hand out of thin air. It is a key that records the 2 mysterious road signs leading to it. A fairyland surrounded by incense, where immortals caress the top and give birth, is called observing immortals. A holy temple that points to the Lamb's longing, where the gods bless and those who are with them endure for a long time, is called visiting the god. 2 worlds are completely different, yet equally eerie, with a great terror that transcends life and death. The world that Gu Xiuya first visited was observing immortals. Now that more than half a year has passed, he still has no longing for that eerie place. If he had a choice, he wouldn't even want to go to the world of Zhanshen. Unfortunately, the development of things is never determined by him. As the holder of the strange tale, he always stays in this world with strict limits on his time. Once he exceeds the limit, the world will openly show malice towards him and impose the cruelest punishment on him. Aging. Last time, Gu Xiuya only delayed for a minute and then grew white hair. Fortunately, the heat flow inside his body has a powerful vitality far beyond that of humans, and after crossing the border, he also had another adventure to make up for the deficit. Otherwise, he might have become an old man long ago. Gu Xiuya withdrew his thoughts, opened a series of strange books, and saw 5 diamond-shaped marks on the first page of Zhanshen, which were constantly changing in brightness and slowly floating. There was some information in his mind that he had not before, and Gu Xiuya silently felt it and quickly understood the changes. With the 5th diamond mark illuminated, his time spent resting in this world has extended to a month. In addition, he also received an opportunity to restart an across.border-round.trip ticket. Each page of The Strange Tale records a story or a series of events that have occurred before. According to Gu Xiuya's understanding, the essence of cross-border travel is to enter the historical period where the story takes place and perform it again. And the so-called restart is to bring the story back to its original time. All those who died in the story will be resurrected, all things that have happened will be erased, and everything will start anew with a brand new face. In addition, each story has its own time and scope of occurrence, so each entry must follow the corresponding rules for the activity. So far, Gu Xiuya has only figured out 2 rules. Rule 1. Do not disclose any knowledge beyond the times to others. Rule 2. Do not cross the geographical boundaries where the story takes place, and all activities must be carried out within the scope of the story. Rules are iron laws, and once violated, they can lead to various life-threatening accidents. Gu Xiuya has already had a profound understanding of this in the world of observing immortals. The things inside him were rewarded by his nominal master for breaking the rules by talking nonsense in fear. If it weren't for the remaining soul of his original body who took his place and gave him the opportunity to leave, he would have transformed into a wriggling human pill like other Marshall brothers by now. Speaking of which, when I retrieved the ashes, something inside my body seemed to generate some kind of agitation. The previous situation was too critical, and Gu Xiuya didn't have time to check. At this moment, a blurry image immediately came to mind in his mind. This is the ability that comes with heat flow entering the body. It is not as magical as the perspective eyes in novels, and cannot freely examine one's internal organs. However, it can feel the shape, size, and direction of heat flow, making it visible in thinking. Originally, the heat flow in Gu Xiuya's body was in a stacked shape, distributed in the lower abdomen, similar to a compressed gaseous object, which is consistent with its appearance of transforming into a dense light after leaving the body. But now, Gu Xiuya found that this gaseous object had already condensed at some point, gradually revealing a biological outline. Due to the blurry image in my mind, it seems to be covered with mosaic cavalry. Gu Xiuya struggled to recognize it for a while before finally recognizing its approximate appearance. That is a bloated, elongated, scaly reptile. On its body, there were 7 or 8 lumps of flesh bulging up, dancing faintly, as if it was nurturing something. This is the first time Gu Xiuya has seen the physical body of a creature in his abdomen. Previously, this thing appeared in a radiance, and he could still comfort himself. This magical radiance may be something like internal power, and the so-called monster is just a kind of illusion. But now, the images in his mind forced him to accept the facts. The things in my stomach are indeed some strange creature. What's even more terrifying is that this monster seems to be very satisfied with his abdominal environment. At this moment it is coiling its tail around his spine, slowly rubbing its head and occasionally extending its tentacles to tap the side of its joints, looking like it's entertaining itself. Gu Xiuya couldn't help but touch his lower spine, and immediately felt the muscles above his coccyx start to jump and move wildly, as if something was responding to his touch subcutaneously. He felt a momentary chill on his spine. Dong! The ward door was suddenly knocked on. Gu Xiuya looked up in shock and saw a short-haired woman wearing a beige windbreaker pushing away the nurse, breaking into the hospital room and locking the door with a click. The woman's face was a bit tired. She quickly walked to the window and reached out to pick up Gu Xiuya and throw her onto the bed. My time is very tight. Since you are already awake, just lie down and listen to me. My dear neighbor, you came in while I was not at home and ordered 100 deep-sea snails, a set of condensing devices, 3 special glass bottles, 1,000 grams of white phosphorus, and 5 kilograms of thickened gasoline from my phone. Oh, you also stole 2 of my collection knives. Tell me, what do you plan to use to pay for these things? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Mr. Yen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Mr. Yen, I'm very sorry. Faced with the woman's questioning, Gu Xiuya chose to apologize proactively. In fact, if the friend in the other party's record book is not quite awesome, it provides all the necessary items for his plan. He is now mostly in Davis's belly, happily merging with the monster. He has always been humble in treating people who have shown kindness to him. Memories of his predecessor began to emerge in Gu Xiuya's mind. The woman in front of her is the neighbor of her predecessor, who knows about ashes and transformers, and seems to have a neighbor of some organization behind her. My predecessor didn't know his name, but he was called Mr. Yen by others. Mr. Yen is a very mysterious person, which stems from her sleeping day and night, as well as her frequent speaking into the air, using strange language, and then angrily threatening to kill someone. His predecessor once suspected that Mr. Yen was a member of a transnational criminal gang or a fugitive from a mental hospital. Out of the sense of justice and curiosity of young people, a wealthy predecessor offered a heavy reward and found a hacker claiming to be a master online. He installed a small program for eavesdropping in Mr. Yan's intelligent Wi-Fi. Then, my predecessor heard countless unheard of things. About monsters, legends, and summoning gods. The religion in this world is flourishing, and many citizens have been practicing their own denominations since birth. Their understanding and sense of identity in theology are far beyond their past lives. There is also a formal religious authority in the country, which can even influence previous elections. Therefore, after learning about the legendary secret recipe during the listening, the predecessor naturally chose to verify it. He transcribed the news he had overheard and continued to pay online as a reward, which coincidentally caught the attention of an honorary professor at the University of Elton, who learned a lot of legendary information related to summoning rituals. Then, with excitement in his heart, he impatiently conducted verification in the rented house. Then, Gu Xiuya woke up from his body. Every time he thinks of this memory, Gu Xiuya feels particularly absurd. This smooth to incredible process, this coincidental experience that cannot be more coincidental, exudes a taste of conspiracy and calculation. Why did my predecessor not notice any problems until he died? Gu Xiuya had no way of guessing the reason, but at least one thing was certain. It was not Mr. Yen who caused him harm. Because when he woke up, Mr. Yen was driving him to the hospital with one hand, while his other hand was bleeding profusely, murmuring words and touching his forehead, delivering a babbling stream of heat. Gu Xiuya originally thought it was an illusion that arose during his deathbed, but it wasn't until he escaped from the world of observing immortals, with the monster in his belly, that he realized that Mr. Yen, like himself, could actually borrow the abilities of monsters, but with much weaker strength. In fact, Mr. Yen was also deceived in some way in this matter, to the extent that he passively facilitated the death of his predecessor. It is precisely because of this that Mr. Yen became unhappy and wanted to rescue Gu Xiuya, which led to his indulgence towards Gu Xiuya in the later days. Gu Xiuya actually knows this well. If it weren't for Mr. Yan's tacit approval, her friend wouldn't have been so foolish as to take the initiative to credit and prepare so many dangerous items for a 16-year-old child. I will compensate you for all the losses and pay additional thank you fees. You can say the number, but I won't make a counteroffer. Gu Xiuya sincerely said. He feels that he should indeed thank the other party. Mr. Yan snorted lightly and said, with your pitiful pocket money. Gu Xiuya really wants to say that it's not some pitiful pocket money. His cheap father was very wealthy, although when he passed away, he kept most of his inheritance abroad and left a will requiring his children to become adults before they could inherit it. But my stepsister will pay him 50,000 yuan in living expenses on time every month, which is enough to cover the expenses of an ordinary salaried family for 6 months. But on second thought, he also admitted that Mr. Yan, who has such a background, has the right not to take tens of thousands of yuan seriously. Just those 2 incredibly sharp cold forged steel knives are not something that can be sold for tens of thousands of yuan. After pondering for a moment, Gu Xiuya rang the call bell at the bedside. Excuse me, where are my original clothes? There are other things, please send them along. Thank you. Why, does your adventure story also include obtaining the treasure of the dragon? Upon hearing these words, Mr. Yan immediately looked at Gu Xiuya with a childish gaze. In her opinion, when Gu Xiuya sought help from friends to prepare those dangerous things, he most likely overheard his own phone call and once again aroused his desire to pursue mystery. Mr. Yan is very angry about this. Gu Xiuya almost died here last time, and his behavior now belongs to being indomitable. But Mr. Yan did not intend to reprimand him too much, because she knew that children in a rebellious period would never become sensible due to the admonition of others. Only by allowing himself to collide with the south wall and recognize reality, can he truly awaken. Mr. Yan thinks and does this. She has long known about the existence of eavesdropping software, and the reason why she has been left unattended is to pass on some false information to Gu Xiuya, so that he can waste time on the path of destined failure and lose interest. In this regard, Mr. Yan can be considered to have put in a lot of effort. She did not arbitrarily deny something with the authority of an adult. But she chose a more delicate approach, trying to make the reckless boy in her eyes understand some of the world's principles in practice. My mother's tenderness is nothing more than that. What puzzled Mr. Yan was that the news she had recently conveyed to Gu Xiuya was clearly false, so why was Gu Xiuya still injured? And where did the large, dying feline animals come from? Mr. Yan thought of this and snorted coldly, then took the initiative to walk over and open the door. She wants to see what exactly happened to Gu Xiuya. Quickly, the hospital caregiver brought over a dust-proof bag containing Gu Xiuya's clothes and a heavy long box. Gu Xiuya took the bag and opened it, only to find a small note falling out of his clothes. How could a boy drive a big car so weakly? Remember to exercise more in the future, not every time a kind-hearted beauty saves you. Pure Love Church, number 101. Gu Xiuya was a bit confused, and then realized that this note should have been left by the person who saved him. A beautiful girl. Pure Love Church. What are these things? Isn't what I saw a man, dizzy? He was puzzled and said, "May I ask where the person who took me to the hospital is? Could you please let her know that I am awake and I would like to thank her in person?" The caregiver said, "I've already left. This box was handed over to me by him." "Oh, he didn't give me the key. He said he wanted you to figure it out on your own." Gu Xiuya finally realized that there was an extra password lock on the box. He silently felt for a moment and found that the weight of the box had hardly changed, and the ancient gold coin was still well hidden inside. Gu Xiuya didn't know what to say for a moment. The stranger who saved himself and the tap water not only did not take even a gold coin as a reward, but also thoughtfully locked the box for himself to prevent others from coveting it. Although the note left by the other party was somewhat nonsensical, Gu Xiuya still felt the kindness between the lines. He couldn't help but ask, who paid for the treatment fee and did you leave a card number? The nurse said, it's your sister. We contacted her through the registered residence system. Didn't she say she sent you a message? This is really good news. Gu Xiuya frowned slightly, and the relationship between her predecessor and stepsister was like water and fire, maintained only by monthly payment notes. He can imagine that there must be another round of storm after he leaves the hospital. This is really good news. Mr. Yen let out a sneer, and Dan Feng's eyes were full of ridicule. She likes to watch this reckless boy make a fool of himself. Gu Xiuya didn't answer, just politely asked the caregiver to leave, then thought for a moment, turned the lock, and entered 3 numbers 101. With a light click, the password lock was unlocked. Mr. Yen raised his eyebrows slightly. Immediately afterwards, she saw Gu Xiuya reach into the room and take out a gold coin. Is this enough compensation? Gu Xiuya asked. This is not. Mr. Yen instinctively spoke up, but suddenly froze after seeing the style of the gold coins. She grabbed the gold coin and carefully scrutinized it, her face quickly becoming serious. Where did you get this thing from? Gu Xiuya shrugged and said, the treasure of the dragon. Children who learn to speak as adults will be spanked. Mr. Yen furrowed his eyebrows and threatened, tell me honestly. Gu Xiuya saw that she had actually started to roll up her sleeves while speaking, and felt a headache. She had to make an excuse and said, did you not hear what the caregiver said? He threw the blame onto the kind and beautiful girl. Mr. Yen frowned and pondered silently upon hearing the words. After a while, she regained her senses and suddenly reached out to undo the first button on her shirt. Unexpectedly, Gu Xiuya was immediately influenced by some kind of evil god's babbling and remembered the note. Boys, driving big cars. Yen Xian. Yen Jia, this is Bing Dong, please don't do this. Mr. Yen glanced at Gu Xiuya inexplicably, and his slender fingers picked out a necklace from under his towering chest. She lifted the necklace, and the pendant with body temperature almost pressed against Gu Xiuya's nose. The warm aroma spreads, refreshing the heart and spleen. Mr. Yen didn't seem to realize how outrageous her movements were. She opened the clasp of the pendant, revealing a delicate gold coin embedded inside. On one side of the gold coin is a strange and blurry pattern, while on the other side is a finely carved portrait. Mr. Yen pointed to the side of the portrait and asked Gu Xiuya, look carefully, does the person who saved you have this kind of gold coin or something with the same pattern on his body? Gu Xiuya originally intended to casually pass by, but was momentarily stunned after seeing the portrait clearly. That's Davis up there. One-armed Davis. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Ghosts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Ghosts. At this moment, Gu Xiuya stiffened in shock. What's going on? Why does Davis's portrait appear in the real world? A strong sense of detachment rose in Gu Xiuya's heart, and the portrait in front of him left him in a daze. He couldn't even be certain whether he was still in a long-term illusion in the real world or dreaming in a coma. Is it really true or not? What exactly is true? What's wrong with you? Mr. Yen noticed Gu Xiuya's abnormality. She noticed that Gu Xiuya's eyes were losing focus, his pupils gradually dilated, and his eyelids were constantly convulsing, as if he had been startled in some way. So he immediately raised his hand and slapped Gu Xiuya. Pop! Wake up! Hey! Wake up! She shouted loudly, helped Gu Xiuya's head, opened her eyelids, and prevented him from sleeping. Gu Xiuya regained consciousness in a daze. Mr. Yen finally breathed a sigh of relief and frowned, what happened to you just now? Gu Xiuya didn't speak, just silently looked at Mr. Yen. He didn't know if the living person with body temperature in front of him really existed. He suspected that everything in front of him might be an illusion brought to him by the arrival of reality. Otherwise, it cannot be explained why Davis's portrait appeared in reality. It's ridiculous. It's too confusing. Gu Xiuya clenched his fist, suppressing the restlessness in his heart. Mr. Yen touched Gu Xiuya's forehead and comforted him softly, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." "I'm not afraid." Gu Xiuya whispered, "I just can't distinguish." "Can't distinguish what?" Mr. Yen had some confusion in his eyes. What should people do when they can't distinguish between dreams and reality? Gu Xiuya whispered, as if asking himself, or as if asking Mr. Yen. Mr. Yen frowned slightly, although he couldn't understand why Gu Xiuya asked this question. He replied, "If you're dreaming, you can try jumping off a high place. As long as the drop is large enough, you can wake up instantly. What if you jump down and realize it's not in your dream?" Gu Xiuya looked at the nearby windowsill and asked. Mr. Yen suddenly felt a wave of bone-chilling sensation. This feeling stems from the scenes depicted by Gu Xiuya, as well as from Gu Xiuya's clearly abnormal mental state. Why does this child have such thoughts? Mr. Yen doesn't know what's wrong with Gu Xiuya, but she wants to help him. After pondering for a moment, she said in a deep voice, "If I'm not sure if I'm dreaming, I have a way." Gu Xiuya looked up at her. "Believe in truth and argue for existence." Mr. Yen said slowly, "Even if an ordinary person dreams, no matter how real the dream may seem, there won't be any knowledge they haven't learned inside. Because dreams are just the stitching and reproduction of past memories." Gu Xiuya listened silently. Although Mr. Yan's method was not rigorous enough, it did make some sense. "Can I borrow my phone for a moment?" He reached out his hand. Mr. Yen took out his phone and handed it to him. Gu Xiuya opened the search software and entered 4 words in the dialog box. Advanced Mathematics. The result quickly showed up, and Gu Xiuya looked around for a moment to make sure he didn't know anything at all. The possibility of dreaming has been temporarily ruled out. But what if it's an illusion? No, it shouldn't be an illusion. Gu Xiuya recalled the feeling he had when experiencing hallucinations before, which was chaotic and disorderly. Everything in front of him was expressed in a form that violated geometric principles, and it was impossible to be as full of rules as it is now. That is to say, is all of this true? Does Davis's portrait really appear in reality for some reason? Following this logic, Gu Xiuya felt much better in her heart. He didn't think about what to do if he was actually dreaming now. As Mr. Yen said, devoutly believing is the primary focus of getting rid of self-doubt and restoring normal thinking. As for whether everything in front of us is true or false before there is any real testing method, before discovering false signs, Gu Xiuya will only tell herself that it is true. "You're very smart." Looking at Gu Xiuya, who had regained his normal mind, Mr. Yen felt a bit complicated. In fact, the boundary between dreams and reality is not as obvious as she said. Many times, the difference between the two is so subtle that ordinary people have no way of distinguishing them, and the ultimate result of being stubborn in distinguishing between truth and falsehood can only become mental illness. The method she proposed is essentially a lie. A lie that has a certain effectiveness under the belief of idealism. Of course, she can be certain that what she sees at this moment is true, so ultimately it is not considered deception. Let's get back to business. Mr. Yen shook the pendant in his hand and said, "You had such a big reaction just now. Have you seen this portrait before?" "I have seen it online." Gu Xiuya perfunctorily asked, "Who is this person?" "The first head of esoteric Buddhism. Armless companion. Finch Davis. The gold coin you brought out was once one of the circulating coins minted by the Davis family." "What is esoteric Buddhism?" "A group of crazy believers," Mr. Yen said absent-mindedly. Gu Xiuya remained silent. If all of this is not a dream or illusion, then the appearance of Davis is undoubtedly an indication of the story in the strange tale, which overlaps to some extent with reality. Gu Xiuya's gaze fell on Davis's broken arm, which was bitten off by tap water during the transformation. This is the impact he caused in the story, but now it appears in reality. No, it's not right. The story and reality are related, but the relationship is not simply overlapping, but rather extended transmission. The story has been passed down to this day and has become a reality. This idea came out of nowhere and quickly connected his previous understanding of the strange tale. Many judgments are instantly overturned and then re-established with more reasonable arguments. Gu Xiuya felt a slight tremble. That's not a story at all. That's history. The history of this world. He, who was in it, was like a ghost. The ghosts wandering through history leave traces wherever they pass and produce results in reality. Gu Xiuya's thoughts suddenly became clear, and his doubts about the authenticity of the real world dissipated. As long as you enter the strange tale again, everything will be answered. You seem to have thought a lot of things. Mr. Yen scrutinized Gu Xiuya and said, "Why do you know this person's name?" The internet makes knowledge within reach. Not only knowledge is within reach, but also the cost. Mr. Yen had a cold face and was somewhat unhappy. Don't forget who almost died in my car last time. Mr. Yen, I'm not a child anymore. I know what I'm doing. Gu Xiuya didn't mind Mr. Yan's paternal scolding, but only said a sentence to her that his predecessor had said. If there really is a God in this world, I must find him and ask why he took my father away. I can pay any price for it. Mr. Yen remained speechless for a moment. She suddenly remembered that the 16-year-old child in front of her had no parents since childhood. Sorry. Mr. Yen sighed in his heart. She struggled to maintain the feigned indifference on her face, pulled up the blanket, and covered Gu Xiuya's bandaged left hand. You rest first, let's talk about other things later. Gu Xiuya grabbed her finger and wanted to speak, but was stunned at the next moment. He felt a resonance. Mr. Yen has something inside his body. Something similar to ashes, but much weaker than it. Gu Xiuya slowly lifted his head. I know you can help me. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Antennae. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Antennae. Gu Xiuya's appeal was not effective. Mr. Yen eventually left. She took a gold coin with her for inspection without revealing any secrets. Before leaving, she even pulled up Gu Xiuya's hair as punishment. It is obvious that in Mr. Yan's eyes, Gu Xiuya has always been just a child. Gu Xiuya didn't care about this. He had plenty of time and believed that he would eventually achieve what he wanted and gain true knowledge. Moreover, he has another option. Gu Xiuya closed her eyes and opened her fingers to brush the long box. The gold coins rubbed against his fingertips, feeling cold to the touch. 2 fingers gradually penetrate and touch the bottom. Gu Xiuya suddenly felt a slight heat on his spine, and the hot plate kept rising, surging to his fingertips in a restless state. Cluttering sounds began to emerge in his ears, vaguely urging him to eat. Found it. Gu Xiuya opened his eyes and pinched out a gold coin to scrutinize before his eyes. This is a long gold coin, with a floral pattern engraved on one side and a portrait of an old man on the other. The carving is not very exquisite and looks not much different from the other coins in the box. The only difference is that this gold coin is older than other coins, stained with some unknown liquid, appearing gray and without any refraction in the sunlight. Gu Xiuya rubbed it with his fingers, but it didn't rub off, but it made the heat flow even more restless. This couldn't help but remind him of the scene when he first got something similar. Not long after moving into Shantian Temple, he accidentally discovered that the heat flow inside his body seemed to be very interested in the incense burner in the Taoist temple. Whenever he passes by the incense burner, the heat flow will stir inexplicably. After a series of experiments, Gu Xiuya finally determined that the source of the heat flow disturbance was not the incense burner itself, but the 3 clumps of incense ash condensed into water droplets in the incense burner. Due to unclear reasons, Gu Xiuya cautiously did not make any attempts, but consciously suppressed the restlessness in his body and tried to stay away from the incense burner as much as possible. At first, his method did indeed work. But as time goes by, the restlessness of the heat flow becomes stronger and stronger. In the end, it even developed to the point of producing auditory hallucinations, and some nagging sounds began to appear in his ears, tempting him to swallow those incense ashes. Gu Xiuya endured for several days, but still couldn't resist. He woke up in the middle of the night and swallowed a large mouthful of incense ash. The next day, when he woke up by the incense burner and recalled this incident, he realized that the heat flow in his body had undergone some kind of change unconsciously, giving birth to the ability to assimilate and strengthen biological constitution. What exactly is this liquid? Gu Xiuya lowered his head and looked at the gold coin in his hand. The dark liquid radiated on the surface of the coin, like frozen ripples. I don't know if it's an illusion, but Gu Xiuya felt the liquid on the surface of the gold coin suddenly wriggle. He looked carefully and realized that it was not a daze. On the surface of the gold coin, there was a needle-sized liquid slowly wriggling, breaking free from constraints and floating in mid-air. Next are the second and third drops. More and more liquids come to life from stillness, swaying away from the coins and soaring into the air. For a moment, Gu Xiuya's eyes were almost filled with gray spots. This eerie liquid seems to have some kind of light absorption property, even in sunlight it is still dull and gloomy, floating in mid-air, twisted and entangled, stretching longer and longer. Other objects in the line of sight seemed to be affected by some kind of influence and began to become twisted and strange. Gu Xiuya suddenly realized that she had entered the real world alone without the influence of any remaining creatures. All the changes in front of us, including the insect tide, are illusions and signs caused by the arrival of reality. But this is simply impossible. Why can he enter the real world independently as a human? Also, why hasn't the sun disappeared? Gu Xiuya saw the sunlight sprinkled on the blanket, but there was no temperature left. He feels a bit confused in his mind. This strange world seems to be full of malice towards him. Whenever he consciously has a certain understanding of something, there will always be various unexpected situations that will overturn his originally determined inference and cause him to fall into chaos. Ignorance is a form of protection. At this moment, Gu Xiuya suddenly had a new understanding of a sentence that Mr. Yen had once said. He sighed in his heart, but without hesitation, reached out to his forehead, summoning warmth. This time, the feeling was completely different from before. Gu Xiuya noticed something flowing through his blood vessels, but it was no longer as light as nothing, but had a certain quality and shape. He closed his eyes and felt a faint image in his mind. That is a tentacle. A slender and soft tentacle resembling a vine plant. It extends from the coccyx, passes through the 5 internal organs, diverges along the blood vessels, runs through the entire body, and converges at the spine. Gu Xiuya remembered the tree root that hurt his feet. Then I felt a slight itching in my throat. He saw his antennae poking in from the top of his neck, climbing up his cheeks, and reaching his forehead. He couldn't help but reach out to touch his face and found that his skin was smooth and delicate, without any protrusions, as if the image in his mind was just an illusion. Buzz. Gu Xiuya suddenly saw Venus in his eyes. He felt a slight stabbing pain and then realized that the tentacle had pierced his forehead. The hardest calcification of human beings is as fragile as a thin film in front of this tentacle. It gently burrows into the skull, lazily sways for a moment, and finally unfolds, completely entangled with the gray matter of the brain, indistinguishable from each other. Gu Xiuya felt a bit heavy in his head, as if something was growing. He silently pressed on his temples and waited until he felt better before opening his eyes again. The next moment, he noticed a change in the strange floating liquid in front of him. No, it's not a change. The liquid itself has not changed at all, what has been changed is its cognitive ability. Gu Xiuya seemed to have received divine enlightenment and had an inexplicable enlightenment at this moment. He recognized the essence of the liquid, which was clearly a form of information. A type of information that he cannot currently decipher and is beyond the scope of human cognition. At this moment, the greatest and most dangerous thirst for knowledge of humanity erupted, and Gu Xiuya couldn't help but have a thought in his heart. It would be great if we could identify this type of information. With this thought in mind, Gu Xiuya suddenly felt a swelling in pain in the back of his head. Mr. Gu. Mr. Gu. The call came suddenly, and a figure wearing a white coat gradually appeared before my eyes. Gu Xiuya shook his head and realized that he had somehow left the real realm and returned to reality. What's going on? He touched his forehead and whispered to the doctor in front of him. Let me take a look at your situation. The doctor with glasses frowned and looked at Gu Xiuya, as if confirming his mental state. After a while, the doctor suddenly asked, "What bit did your cat get?" "I don't know." The doctor looked at Gu Xiuya and said, "No, you know. Do you have a mental illness? When you were sick, you bit your cat and ate the meat you bit off. We have examined the wound marks on the cat's body and found that they basically matched the arrangement of human teeth." Gu Xiuya glanced at him and remained silent for his genius ideas that were both right and wrong. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Sprouting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Sprouting. You see, your current mental state is not quite right. The doctor pointed at Gu Xiuya and shook his head repeatedly. It's best for you to have a check. Up and take some medicine. I'll open a green channel for you, and you can get a certain fee reduction. No need. Gu Xiuya interrupted him, please arrange for my discharge. Young man, your left limb is missing too much and you are basically disabled. It's not a good idea to be discharged now. The doctor lowered his head and glanced at Gu Xiuya's bandaged left hand, saying, Can staying here cure it? Cough, our hospital currently does not have this strength. The doctor coughed and said, but I once saw a new technology at a surgical seminar that can replace damaged parts of the body by culturing new limbs with DNA carried by blood, without any rejection reactions. The only problem is that this technology is currently in the phase 1 clinical trial stage, and if you want to experience it, you may need to pay an additional cost. Gu Xiuya sensed something and said, what do you want to say? Well, first of all, I have to tell you something. Your very big cat's heart has stopped beating. The doctor said slowly, observing Gu Xiuya's reaction as he spoke, seemingly worried that this news would cause the patient in front of him to become mentally abnormal again. There was no surprise in Gu Xiuya's eyes, but he said lightly, I understand. Give me its body, and I'll take it with me. Listen to me finish speaking. The doctor said, although its heart has stopped beating, its brain remains active. In other words, from a conscious perspective alone, it is still alive. This is a very rare situation with high research value. If you are willing to provide its body for medical analysis, I can use personal connections to help you contact those people and cure your hand. A dead pet, changing hands, it's really cost-effective. You're good to take the exam. Gu Xiuya got out of bed, picked up his collar, and dragged him out of the hospital room. Get lost. Cough cough. The doctor stumbled and tried to persuade him again, but when he saw Gu Xiuya's expressionless face, he inexplicably felt a hint of fear towards this young man who was 20 years younger than him. If you regret it, you can call this number. He took out a business card and placed it on the doorknob, then left without looking back. Gu Xiuya grabbed the business card and prepared to throw it away, but frowned slightly when he saw the name. Shang Ming seems to have heard it somewhere before. He didn't think carefully and casually threw away his business card, starting to change clothes. This move inevitably involved the wound on his left hand. Gu Xiuya felt a slight itch on the back of his palm and pressed it through the gauze, only to find that it didn't hurt. He was immediately surprised. After hesitating for a moment, he removed the wrapping of the bandage. When the last layer of gauze was peeled off, Gu Xiuya saw an extremely terrifying scene. His hands have sprouted. The slender vines twisted on the wound, intertwining and weaving the outline of a half-cut palm. The crimson rhizomes slowly wriggle, and blood flows through them. Gradually, meat chunks are spit out, hanging on them like fruits, densely packed. Gu Xiuya looked straight at his hand, as if he had lost his mind. After a while, he silently restored the gauze to its original state, picked up something, and walked out of the hospital room. Gu Xiuya sat in a taxi, glanced at the exotic buildings outside the window, and his gaze fell on the smart screen in the back seat of the car. The development of this world is vastly different from the past, and there has never been a true unification in history. This situation continues to this day, creating hundreds or even thousands of countries around the world. And their respective religions. Different beliefs bring countless contradictions, and conflicts and wars are the most common news in this world. Fortunately, people ultimately yearn for peace. With the development of modernization, peace has been placed on the negotiation table under the trend of the times. The undercurrent is gradually being concealed under the hustle and bustle, with only occasional numbers appearing in the news, highlighting some unknown stories. The place where our ancestors lived was a great country called White Star. Due to its vast territory and strong national strength, it can be considered one of the safest countries in the world. Its territory area is roughly equal to one province in the previous life. Sir, here we are in Elton City. Next to it is Central Park. The driver stopped the car and reminded. Gu Xiuya responded, took out the money he had just exchanged for a gold coin at the gold shop, paid for the fare, grabbed the blue woven bag next to him, and got off the taxi. The bag contains the remains of tap water. The doctor didn't lie, the tap water was indeed dead. The inactive cells are accelerated by microorganisms in the oxidation reaction, and the smell of flesh and blood rotting once made people around frown. But Gu Xiuya could feel that the heat flow he delivered to the big cat's body was still highly active, which protected the brain of tap water. They crossed the body, independently and continuously supplied nutrients to the brain, allowing tap water to temporarily resist true death. The good news is that this situation can be sustained through money. Gu Xiuya unzipped and glanced inside the bag. In just an hour's effort, the 10 pounds of pork he had just bought had collapsed in its entirety, as if a cake had been hollowed out, leaving only a layer of skin. Some small tentacles began to pull out from the meat and wobbled back into the mouth of the tap water, disappearing between the teeth. As the monsters inside Gu Xiuya's body changed, the heat flow inside the tap water also transformed into a similar shape. This vine-like antennae seemed to be able to absorb certain substances from the flesh and blood, establishing a new nutritional cycle system for the host and providing the necessary nutrients for activity. The survival of tap water is all thanks to this. The bad news is that Gu Xiuya doesn't know how long this situation can last. At present, it seems that the heat flow after ex vivo does not possess the ability to weave flesh and reshape the body. So he must find a complete cure for tap water as soon as possible. Gu Xiuya placed his hope on the ancient gold coin, and he vaguely felt that as long as he saw the knowledge on the coin, he could obtain a method to treat tap water. This idea emerged shortly after seeing knowledge, and Gu Xiuya couldn't explain the reason, but inexplicably felt it was very reasonable. He attributed this feeling to the enlightenment in the dark, just like the branch that reminded him to pay attention to the monsters inside. Perhaps there are gods in this world. Gu Xiuya walked into the rented community. This used to be a famous upscale community in the city of Elton, with the busiest commercial pedestrian street 800 meters away. The surrounding hospitals, schools, churches, and other supporting facilities are complete, and 6 wallets can be emptied from the height of their past lives. But now it's old, and old things are always despised by people. The community has been built for 30 years, and various facilities are starting to age. Except for those who cannot move and those who do not want to move, the majority of people living here are young migrant workers. At this moment, the night was getting late. As usual, the community was very quiet, with almost no one moving except for occasional security personnel passing by. But today it is noisy with people. Gu Xiuya saw many people gathered around the 3 buildings in the community, blocking the elevator he was about to take. There are 2 SUVs flashing alarms next to the crowd, but they don't look like police cars. The blue and white isolation strip surrounds the entrance hall and pulls it all the way to the flower bed position. The flash rose and fell with the sound of the shutter, illuminating the dimly lit lobby after the power outage, faintly revealing dark red blood stains on the ground. End of this chapter.